We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. I think we had success last week and this week with me being hardwired in as far as Tom's video actually looking like smooth video and not 1 frame a second. So I think we fixed it. Hooray. Come watch the YouTube video again. It won't be like a horribly annoying mess to watch. We think.
I'm sick. I don't know what's wrong with me. So I woke up with just feeling icky. So my wife had a cold, a non-COVID cold last week. I thought I had avoided it, but maybe I have not. So
Probably
I woke up this morning. I wasn't feeling great yesterday, but nothing specific. Just kind of felt tired.
Yeah.
And then this morning I woke up and went, ugh. So this podcast will be over when this podcast is over. I also have
low energy.
Yeah. I also have somebody coming over to
something.
So somebody gave us a piano, right? My youngest son plays piano. Yeah, wow. It's a stand-up piano. Yeah. These things tend, people at some point in their lives are like, someone gave it to them, or they bought it secondhand or whatever. Yeah. They've had it for like over a decade, and it's just sitting in their house collecting dust. And they're like, we don't care. We just want somebody to take it. Mm-hmm. And our piano teacher or his piano teacher told us about it, and it was free, but nothing's ever free. So we have to pay somebody to move it. It's an upright, so it doesn't take up a ton of room.
It's not a grand piano, but still, it's still a big item, not the easiest things to move around.
Yes, so you have to pay somebody to go do it. Yeah. So they delivered it a week or two ago, and now we have to have it tuned because it hasn't been tuned in 8+ years, and it's been moved, and all this other stuff. So that's extra money. Anyways, the tuner guy's coming over today. Supposed to be here right as this podcast is supposed to end. So if the dog goes crazy, you will not hear from me at that point, because that means somebody's knocking at the door.
Understood.
I need to go put a mask on and go let this guy in.
Okie doke.
Gal. I don't even know. So anyways, yes.
Saving us a little time. Tom didn't watch anything this week, so that goes quickly. Yeah,
I started the new Black Panther movie. Okay. And I really liked the opening sequence, and the kind of tribute that you might expect would be there.
To Chadwick Boseman, the late Chadwick Boseman, who passed away, unfortunately.
Yep. Yes. So but that's as far as I got before. And it's a 2-hour and 40-minute movie, and there's no way my wife is sitting through it, so I'm going to have to watch it in 5-minute increments Yeah.
The ideal way to watch a movie like that.
Yes.
Which does have an emotional core. There's, no better way to enjoy an emotional core than in little chunks at a time.
I know. I'm frustrated just thinking about it.
I think you should re-record it on your phone and watch it in vertical form on TikTok. That will be the ideal way to enjoy Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.
It just scroll up every 3 minutes. Scroll up every 3 minutes.
If you miss something, it'll loop. So, it'll be perfect.
All right. So what did you watch, Rob?
I watched Underwater. That's going back a couple, 3-4 years. I don't know how long ago that was. Kristen Stewart in a horror.
Is it a monster movie?
It's a horror movie. I guess I'll give it away because I don't really care. Yeah, it's a monster movie, sort of. What it is it's a horror movie that attempted to be every type of horror movie that exists.
So there's ghosts. And
not quite ghosts, no. But
there's curses, Japanese curses, people coming out of monitors and stuff like that, and also a shark.
Not quite there, but not that far off. Basically, I didn't think this was a very good movie. Each and every character is from a different horror movie. So, is this a comedy horror? Well, one character thinks it is. Is this a religious horror? Well, one character thinks it is. Is this a kaiju horror? Well, one of them thinks it is. Like, it's... and so it has
and in the end, it was a romantic comedy. Who knew?
Well, actually,
surprise twist! It's a twist.
It's not that far. There's a little bit of a romance.
Directed by M. Night. M. Night Shyamalan.
So, all of that, of course, if you can't tell by the tone of my voice, has the effect of not being scary at all. Now, look, I always want to
feature in recent horror movies, in my experience. New Hellraiser movie.
Yeah.
Fell asleep.
I always want to be understanding of horror movies. They're trying to make this look like it has a much bigger budget than it has. They put effort into the costumes very clearly, but there's a lot of stuff where it's like, well, we've just got to put a camera right up to somebody's face because we can't show you what's going on behind them right now. We don't have the budget for that. Yeah. Or this camera that was showing how this part of the thing is going to flood, well, it's going to cut away now because we don't have the budget to show you that. So, that to me is like, okay, I want to be fair to the filmmakers because clearly if they had the budget and time, they would have done those things. So I'm not going to put that on them. But yeah, the overall effect, didn't think it was a terribly great movie. If you want to have it on in the background, that'd be
Kristen
fine.
Stewart.
It's got Kristen Stewart. She's running around in her underwear when she isn't in a gigantic, overblown costume. She's either wearing all the clothes or very little clothes. It's one or the other. The only two extremes exist. Yeah, like it's very dark. It's very dark. I saw it in Dolby Vision, so I was getting it with the HDR. But it's a very dark, obscured movie. Except when they could have done the thing where you barely see the creatures. But then at one point they're like, nope, it's not going to be that type of movie either. We're just going to show it to you in full lighting. Take away that little bit of the horror too. So there you go. The thumbs down. Underwater.
Oh well. That's too bad.
We won't belabor it anymore because we got lots to get to.
There's a couple of things I want to see. There's quite a few movies that I want to see. So whatever. Let's just get onto it.
Yes.
Right. AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is email us at question@avrant.com. Mm-hmm. Send us your question along with every bit of pertinent information along with your question, even if you think it's not pertinent. I just want to put that out there because I'm very tired of not questions on this, not the questions that we get sent at question@avrant, but questions that we get.
Tom Peruse's Reddit. That's where a lot of this is coming
from. That's the problem. That's
where it's all stemming
my
from.
receiver is overheating. How can I stop it? I'm like, could you have given it? I guess technically you could have said my electronic device is overheating.
Sure.
That would be
put a fan on
less information.
That's the answer they want. Put a fan on it. You're done.
So yes, please, model numbers, names, adjacent equipment, types of cables connected, all that stuff. You can come to our website, avrant.com, where you can find our previous episodes along with show notes and Flickr albums so you can follow along with the pictures. Mm-hmm. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast is one way of getting hold of us. YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can see our recording sessions and me in 2 to 5 frames per second.
It's better now. Should be 30 frames a second. Rock solid.
Exciting. Rock solid, man. Welcome to
all 720p resolution glory of it too. We're right up to date over here.
We should limit it to 24p just so that we can say we're it's more cinematic.
Yeah.
It's a cinematic podcast.
I don't think Skype has an option to input at 24p, so I don't necessarily want the frame rate adjustment being done in the editing software and all that. It's bad enough when one of them is recording at 29.97 and the other one at 30 integer, so that by the end of the 2-hour-long podcast, the lips are slightly out of sync, and I'm not going to bother fixing it anymore, so all kinds of fun technical things.
Yeah. Contact us directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. You can send your hate mail there, I guess. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. So I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, which will take you to a PayPal donation site. And we want to thank Stefan for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Stefan.
Yeah, for sure, Stefan. Thank you for the PayPal donation. We appreciate your financial support.
And we also have 142 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Patreon's a service where you can be a monthly contributor to our podcast. Every month I'll take a little money from you and give most of it to us. A minimum of $1. So $12 a year. Seems quite reasonable for the amount of time that we put into this thing.
Indeed. So, yeah, that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thank you to our 142 patrons over there.
If you can't support us financially, do something to support us, and we'll mention you here. So I will first want to mention Nelson, who reached out with a question about one of his movie codes that he got. He wanted to know if that's what we were talking about, so he sent us a picture of it, and with the clear instructions for us not to use it, which of course we won't, because that would be illegal. And Nelson, that is in fact a movie code. You have correctly identified it. So thank you, Nelson.
Thank you, Nelson, for sending the movie code. We promise we'd never do such a thing, as the terms and conditions explicitly say not to do.
That's right. We will never do that, Nelson. Fear not.
That's
but
right.
you have identified what a movie code is. Anybody else
very safe
is unclear as to what a movie code is, send us an image of your movie code.
Oh, yeah.
And we will identify whether or not it is a correct movie code or not.
Yep. That's how it works.
We also, Greg sent in some photos for me to use with his permission on avgadgets.com. So thank you very much, Greg, for sending those photos over.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Yeah, those photos, I'm not sure if Tom already looked through them. There were quite a few of them, but they will be I think they will be useful if you do an article on that type of thing. So good stuff. Thank you, Greg.
Yes. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through whatever's going on. I guess we've got earthquakes this week, so that's terrible.
Yeah, we had a little one up here, too. Yeah.
You know, in case anybody has forgotten, which I'm sure all of you have, because why would you remember? But my wife is Turkish. She's half Turkish. She didn't have any family in that area, which is good for us. But back in 99, there was a couple of very big earthquakes in Turkey.
Right.
And I can tell you from personal experience, almost certainly there's a lot of people in Turkey that are still suffering some form of trauma from that experience. So this is going to be super triggering for anybody that isn't even if they're not directly affected by it, because unlike the building codes here in the United States, where, you know, like San Francisco, everything fell down in, what was it, 04 or whatever it was, 24 or whatever the big one was out there. You know, building codes were improved and everything else, and that's not the case in many countries in the world. And you know, they had people on the news telling them, go inspect your buildings for cracks before you go inside. And they were like, Are you kidding me? I'm supposed to look at my building and know what I'm looking at? So there was a lot of, there's a lot going on. So, of course, you know, for those that, and there's other terrible things, and it also affected Syria, other terrible things going on in the world. But that's the one that's on my mind right now. So, you know, we are keeping this podcast going while, you know, the world does its stuff. So thank you for thanking us from Stefan, Juls, Kevin. He thought episode 3 of The Last of Us was one of the best things he's ever watched. I've heard good things about it as well. Amazing Atmos effects as well. When are we going to catch up? He can't wait for us to talk about it. And did we play the games? It's on HBO Max, right?
It is HBO Max for you. It's on Crave for me.
Yeah, I am not going to catch up because I don't have HBO Max. But there's some talk around this house about canceling Netflix. So if we cancel Netflix, I've already suggested that we might get HBO Max. My wife's like, I thought we were just going to save money. I'm like, it's really not that much money, but whatever. Okay. So, and I have not played the games. So
I have full intention to catch up on it, but I will be watching it on Crave, which means I won't have Atmos. Crave does 4K, but they don't do HDR of any flavor, and they don't do Atmos, unfortunately. So that'll be the way I'll be catching up on not the absolute best technical end of the thing. I played the first Last of Us game, did not finish it. Played the first one, never played the second one. So there we go. But yes, I'm looking forward to it, Kevin. We are absolutely not avoiding it intentionally in any way. No, it's just the way things go, but I do intend to watch it.
Yeah. Dan says he looks forward to every episode and wouldn't mind at all if we did 2 a week. God help me. Don't have time for 2 a week, Dan, but thank you for your support.
Thank you.
And Gurinder, who says growing up he watched movies in Hindi, and instead of boom, they used the word dishoom.
Dishoom.
Dishoom?
It's onomatopoeia.
Yeah, anyways. For the sound effects of things like punches or gunshots, so he enjoyed it and got a good chuckle when Kingo of Eternals actually said Dishoom when he did one of his energy blasts from his finger thingies. It made him chuckle even more that his kids had no idea while he was laughing. So, that is an Easter... Like, one of the things about Marvel movies that are so good is that they put a lot of Easter eggs in there for the fans.
Yeah.
But they also they're not afraid to put other kinds of Easter eggs in there that people get. You know, some people get and other people won't. And it's just an attention to detail and and it's not just Marvel movies, obviously, but it's always nice when you see stuff like that in there. So I think that's very interesting. I did not know about that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I like that. Yeah, I guess it's even in the subtitles. He does it.
Is it really?
It's a Dishoom, and I'm like, well, that doesn't mean a whole lot to most people, but that's gonna be great. That's gonna be great. So thank you very much. I'll say the names again: Stefan, Juls, Kevin, Dan, Gurinder. Appreciate you thanking us. The notes of encouragement are very much appreciated, and a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
Excuse me. So right after in the news here, right after we recorded last week, Netflix changed their account sharing FAQ and walked all of their anti-password sharing measures with the blocked devices and 7-day temporary codes way back. Mm-hmm. My wife and I were still talking about that, which is why we were talking about
possibly canceling Netflix, right?
But, yeah. So, and the thing I told her is like, there's like no benefit to keeping it. Like, there's no reason to keep it. Like, if we just want to try something else for a while and watch certain shows. The problem is all the shows on HBO Max I want to watch, she don't want to watch. She doesn't want to watch the Dragon stuff. She doesn't want to watch Game of Thrones. She doesn't want to watch The Last of Us. She's not going to want to watch any of that.
Okay.
So there, I would be getting it for me, and I can't even get through a movie without having to take breaks because people are in the room who don't want to watch it. Now my plan is like Saturday, this coming Saturday, I'm going to sit down with my 13-year-old son and watch the Black Panther movie. Mm-hmm. But there's just no reason.
Does your wife watch any of the Discovery content? Because that's all going to get rolled into it in the coming months.
No,
not
really. She likes documentaries, but she just won't search them out herself, and I don't do it.
Right.
Anyway, so the FAQ just says you need to verify any device that is accessing Netflix using your account outside of your primary residence periodically. Verifying a device is just like any other two-factor authentication. And they send you a code to your phone or email, and you have 15 minutes to enter that code on the device. Will the rules change again? Who knows? But for now, the password sharing crackdown won't be nearly as severe. I just don't understand. I just don't understand how these decisions get made. I don't know who is in the room. I don't want to be a quote Hamilton here, but who's in the room when this stuff happens? Because the same thing is going on like in the game industry where like they're closing down these live service type games, which they were supposed to be, we're going to update them for years and years and years, and people are like, I'm not going to play that crap, and then they have to cancel it. And now everybody who spent any money on it is out of all their money and everything else. And there's people in the boardroom going, I can't believe this didn't work. How could you not know it wasn't going to work? How could you not know?
Being out of touch. I said last week when we talked about the measures that it was posted on their official FAQ. It's not like this was a leak or a rumor or we were reporting on something somebody was speculating about. This was officially posted on Netflix.com. It was there. You can go to the Wayback Machine and still see what was printed there. I, in fact, included that link, changed the link to our links last week in the show notes so that you could see what was there when we talked about it last week.
So and stupid, man.
Like I said, they're putting that out there before they enacted any of it. So they were clearly doing that to gauge response. It took one day of it being up for them to completely walk it all back. So it's like, you couldn't predict.
There's almost some part of me that believes that they put it up there in hopes that people wouldn't notice, so that when they enacted it, they'd be like, "Oh, it's been there for a long time. I mean, you guys never noticed that? That's been there.
How out of touch
the way it was."
Do you have to be to think that that's the way the world works anymore? Like, it takes one TikTok, one person to find it and put it up, and now it's spread to everybody.
Yeah, and it's punishing your. Not only is it punitive in that you punish your users, but one of the big selling points of Netflix for a very long time was that you could share up to your passwords with more people. I mean, that was the whole thing, right? You have 4 or 5 accounts all connected to it at the same time. And all of a sudden, but only if you're in the same house. Who thought? I mean, it was just stunningly bad.
We'll see how it goes from here.
Well, I'm glad that Reed Hastings was like, I'm going to peace out of this before they make this thing.
He left before they did it.
He's like, you guys think this is a good idea? I've already gotten enough bad press. I finally it's been long enough that people don't remember all this things I said like 5 years ago. So I'm just going to peace out, and you guys can take the heat for this one. Oh, no, it's going to be fun.
He left right after they announced that they had gained new subscribers again. He's like, there we go. I'm out now.
I'm good. So, speaking of policy changes that seem to be getting immediate backlash, AMC that was theaters and studios.
Gotcha. Theaters is the official thing, though.
Yeah. AMC theaters are rolling out Sightline at AMC at select locations in New York. Sightline. So it's in New York, Chicago, and Kansas City with plans to expand it to all AMC locations by the end of the year. What is Sightline AMC, you may ask? Because that's what I'm asking, because I haven't read this yet. It's higher prices for the best preferred seats, lower prices for the worst value seats, and the same current prices for standard seats. They're saying this makes going to the movies more like concerts, sporting events, or live theater, and you all can suck it. That's exactly the way I feel about that.
How surprising.
I did see something this weekend. I'll talk about it in a second. You'll need to be an AMC Stubs member, the free tier, to get the value seating price. Otherwise, even the worst seats still cost the current standard price. And if you're a paid AMC Stubs A-list member, you can get the more expensive preferred seats without paying any extra. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Now, I mean, you can see where this idea came from because, yes, you go to a live concert, you go to Broadway, you go to a sporting event at a stadium or an arena, and different seats cost different amounts of money. The best seats cost more money. The seats way up in the rafters behind a support column where you can't see half of what's going on cost less money. That is a thing, so you can see where they got this idea. They're like, how can we generate a little bit more revenue? Well, the seats that are 2/3 back from the screen and in the middle of the auditorium, we'll charge more for those seats. That's what we'll do. And you can see where it came from. Yeah. I mean, also, who's enforcing this? Because when somebody goes ahead and buys the value seat and then comes to the theater and sits in the best seat, who enforces that? The ushers?
Now you need police.
Because there are security when you go to like a sports arena, like full on security,
or a theater or whatever.
Sure.
There's ushers everywhere, and they're making sure that you're getting to your seat properly and everything's marked and everything else. So now they're going to have to go through in every single one of their theaters. They're going to have to put numbers and rows and everything else, and then So we did go this weekend to go see Wicked, which is a musical. Some friends they have season tickets and they weren't going to use them. And long story short, we went and saw it. And we sat 6 rows back from the stage, which is the closest I've ever sat at any.
That's probably a bit too close for an event like that.
It is too close, first of all. It is too close.
Yeah.
Second of all, there was one person sitting directly in front of the 2 seats that we had who was not particularly tall, but had like 8 inches of hair just straight up.
Yep.
And the person would not keep their head still. They just kept moving it back and forth. So it was like a constant game of like trying to get around, see around this person's head so you could see what was going on the stage. So the first act, my wife sat behind this person. The second act, I sat behind the person so that, we both got to share in the awfulness. Free seats, so certainly not going to complain. But this is, what are you going to do if you're in a movie theater that is basically empty? Like for what was it? What's that? The Cinema Dome in Los Angeles, right? They have assigned seats at that place.
The Cinerama Dome, yeah.
Cinerama Dome, that's it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, so does AMC. You have the reserved seating, but I mean, just because you've bought a reserved seat doesn't stop someone from physically sitting there if they got there before you.
Yeah.
Right? And you can go complain to the usher and the manager and they'll come in and talk to them. There's no chance any confrontations or violence is going to happen out of this, right? Yeah.
I live in Florida. Okay. Right. I'm just going to leave that there. So, yes. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that somebody did pull a gun in somebody in the movie theater for just talking. So, I don't see how this could possibly backfire at all. So there was if I was looking around, like, I wonder if there's any seats around here to move to, but there wasn't. There wasn't. I was very irritated.
What I find bizarre about this is, like, we essentially have this at most of the theaters in my area in Vancouver, at least, the bigger theaters. And the way they do it is the best seats, the ones that are 2/3 back from the screen and in the center of the auditorium, those are the D-box seats. So if you want to get the best seating location, you end up buying a D-box ticket. That's how they incentivize you to pay more for those seating locations, by also giving you the D-box experience. And I'm like, AMC can't do that. Put tactile transducers in the most important seats and call it, bass shaker experience or whatever.
Bigger.
And
you know what I mean? Just make them bigger and more plusher and everything else. Just call them premium seats.
Sure.
And they are actually premium. They're just not a seat in the middle of everybody else where... Yes.
Yeah, like I think if you're going to charge more, you got to give a little bit something more than just being in the best location inside of the theater. So anyway, clearly we've come up with multiple reasons why this doesn't seem like the best idea at a movie theater. I can totally see how the idea got into some executive's head. But yeah, so far the response online has not been glowing.
All right, I didn't notice this, but didn't read up on it, so I'm glad we're covering it. Sony announced their new lineup of ES, or Elevated Standard AV receivers, plus a single non-ES model, which is not elevated, it's just a normal size. I just see them on stilts now. Now they have to be on stilts. If they're not on stilts, why would you call them elevated? They all have a new chassis design aimed at making them more custom installer friendly with very clean front panels that include a removable plastic face to expose all the buttons if you need them. Welcome to Denon 5 years ago, or Marantz even
Except
before that.
Except these ones aren't on a hinge. These are either on or off.
Oh, that's dumb.
The front face.
Or I like to call it either on or lost.
Yes.
There's a 7.2 channel AZ 1000 ES for $1,100, which has two HDMI 2.1 inputs and no pre-outs, except for two subwoofers, which is just an internal Y splitter, which is fine, but two inputs.
Yeah, or HDMI 2.1. That's enough to switch between your Xbox Series X and your PlayStation 5.
Oh, is there more inputs than that, though?
There are four HDMI 2.0 HDMIs.
Oh, okay. So
out of the 6 inputs, only 2 are HDMI 2.1. It has 2 HDMI outputs, and those are also HDMI 2.1.
Okay. The only non-ES series model announced is the AN1000. Another 1000 for $900, which has the same features as the AZ1000 ES, but just removes the custom installer features. The 9.2 channel AZ3000 ES goes for $1,700. It gets 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs, but still no pre-outs. The AZ5000 ES gives you 11.2 channels for $2,100, 11 amps built in and a full set of pre-outs, 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs, and the AZ7000 ES goes for $3,300. It brings the channel count up to 13.2, 13 amps built in, and a full set of pre-outs with 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs. All of them include a dedicated S-Center output that can connect to compatible Sony TVs to use the TV speaker system as your center, or combine the TV as center with a separate center speaker for what they call acoustic center speaker. So you get the TV and your center speaker working together to make cacophony.
Horrible sound. Yeah.
Just cacophony.
That's right. Yes, and please show me the center speaker that is not acoustic. But anyway,
yes,
that's the name that they went with.
Acoustic cacophony speaker is what I'm going to call it, because that's stupid. The 5000 and 7000 also give you the option to use dual center speakers, one above the screen, one below, and they can all, which no one needs, and they can all use the front height speakers for center lift up if you want. For room correction, they have Sony's own digital cinema audio calibration 9, or IX, I guess.
It's 9.
It uses a stereo microphone with a little included stand to take a stereo measurement at 2 different heights. The stereo mics plus 2 different height measurements are used to triangulate your speaker location, so used with Sony's 3D spatial sound mapping, which they introduced with their wireless HT-A9 system a while back. The idea is if you can't physically put your speakers in their optimal locations, they can use their processing to create phantom speakers, which I think is a good idea. And I'm going to be on board with that. The AN1000 is available now, and the rest supposedly all available by March. So there you go. Let me just put some links in here for all the stuff that I think is wrong with this. I've already written articles about dual center speakers, the Sony TV one.
Yeah, using the TV speakers as your center instead. I keep wanting to call it dialogue lift because that's what Yamaha called it when they first introduced it, having the front height speakers and having those play in conjunction with your center to raise the vertical level of the dialogue. So, a lot of focus on that center speaker and the whole idea of you have to raise it somehow to make it seem like the voices are coming from people's lips. I'm like, have people actually been complaining
that
it doesn't seem like the sound is coming from people's lips? Because that ear, brain, eye system does a heck of a good job of making you think the sound came from where you're looking. But anyway, they focused on that a whole lot. So yeah, doesn't have Dirac, doesn't have one of the other room correction systems that are talked about. This is all Sony proprietary stuff. From the ones who've experienced the 3D 360 spatial sound and all that, basically what it does is just some little bit of phase decorrelation so that everything sounds a bit more diffuse. That's more or less what goes on. It sounds less pinpoint, discrete, and more diffuse when you use that thing. So sometimes that sounds nicer. Other times you're like, well, I know from having listened before that that's supposed to be a very discrete sound effect, and it just doesn't come from that pinpoint location anymore. It's all a bit more diffuse now. The other thing they do when you turn on the 360 spatial sound is bump up the subwoofer output by 10 dB. So that's a lot of what people prefer when they hear the 360 spatial sound.
Bump up the volume, bass.
Yep, that's a bit of what's going on there. So, I mean, the thing is, overall, the price points that they have for these are competitive with others. They're not the lowest price for something that can do 11 or 13 channels, but they're not the highest price either.
Sure.
So they're falling in between there. I do think the aesthetics are nice. Once you have that front panel on, it is a very, very clean look on the front of them. So I appreciate that. The way that they spec'd the power amplification on these, they did it into an 8-ohm load at 1 kilohertz only with 0.9% total harmonic distortion. So that is pretty inflated wattage numbers that you end up seeing when you're using a very limited spec like that to claim higher wattage per channel. And it is 2 channels driven only. So it's not as though these are beasts of amplifiers inside. If you're looking at those numbers, go, 130, 140 watts, that seems a little bit higher than some of the others. It's like, you got to look at the other parameters that are a part of that spec. It's not bad. There's nothing, these aren't way underpowered or anything, but it's not as though they're actually significantly more powerful than anything else. So, they've got decent HDMI 2.1 support. At the very minimum, at least they have 2 inputs, so you can switch between 2 HDMI 2.1 sources like your 2 game systems. So, yeah, I don't really see a compelling reason to, really go after one of these over somebody else's. It's not as though they're way less expensive or have some amazing killer feature that nobody else has. At the same time, I don't see a reason to avoid them. For quite a long time, a lot of Sony receivers were not at feature parity with what else was out there in a given model year. These ones are pretty much at feature parity. So I think they're another perfectly decent option. I did notice on that AZ7000 that can do 13 channels, there is no mention of DTS:X Pro. There's no mention of DTS:X Pro anywhere, so I don't know for certain, but if it is DTS:X only and not DTS:X Pro, DTS:X will be limited to 11 channels on that AZ7000. That can do 13 channels. It can do front wides plus 4 overheads, or it can do 7 bed layer speakers plus 6 overheads. You have those options for Dolby Atmos. But DTS:X, I'm not sure. Like I said, no mention of DTS:X Pro.
All right. Denon didn't officially post the link for their new flagship A1H receiver just yet, but it was fairly easy to find. So there's a manual.
Yes,
that will link you up to. And if you're on the Flickr album or you are watching YouTube, neither of which I'm doing, so you will see some images that Rob's going to post and talk about.
You could follow along in the manual if you want to.
I'm going to try to open it right now.
There you go. You might want to go with the PDF version so that it's actually the thing. But I just wanted to point out a few things that I noticed reading through the manual, because what else is there to do on my weekend when I actually work over the weekend? But, nobody else just reads manuals for fun. Strange people out there. But I did. So a couple of things that I just wanted to point out, because I don't think they'll get a lot of mention elsewhere. One thing that I saw floating around this is for the A1H, and it'll apply to Marantz' AV10, a lot of this stuff too. But there seemed to be a little bit of confusion as to whether it actually did have DTS:X Pro or not. And the reason for that is the thing that is on the website right now as we're recording this is the information sheet. So that's not the manual. It's just like a 2-page information sheet. And it does not list DTS:X Pro on the information sheet that is officially posted as of this recording. So some people are like, does it have it or not? Well, it's right there in the manual. It definitely mentions DTS:X Pro. So that I'm not too worried about. DTS:X Pro is simply going beyond 11 speakers with DTS:X signals. So that is very clearly mentioned in the manual right there. One of the other things was on the discrete subwoofers. It clearly states that, yes, you can adjust the level and the delay individually for up to 4 separate subwoofers. So it's not as though it was still the 2 subwoofers that we already had and they just did internal Y splitters for those. There was some people who questioned that a little bit. So no, it's 4 independent level and delays. It does still sum them all together for the actual equalization of the subwoofer channel, though. So this is the thing where you're getting individual levels and delays, distance settings, but a single EQ applied to all 4 as a mono. I did want to mention it's actually 17 pre-outs and 17 sets of binding posts. They're doing a thing where they have 4 heights that's not like 4 heights with one of them being a 4th height or a front wide. They have dedicated front wides and 4 height connections. And one of the reasons they did that is that they are supporting both the Oro 3D configurations and the Atmos/DTS:X configurations. So you can actually physically connect 17 speakers to this thing. It will drive 15 of them at any given time. So you can have the additional center height and top surround that can be part of Oro 3D, or you could have front heights and rear heights and surround heights, and the surround heights would only get used with Oro 3D. So there actually are 17 speaker connections on the back of that thing. I tweeted out some of the hilarious diagrams that show all the potential speaker locations, including the upward firing speakers and the 4 subwoofers now. And I'm like, yep, completely reasonable configuration for anybody to put into any normal room. And yeah, some people got a bit of a laugh out of that. I was like, look at this diagram of all the potential overhead speakers. How could anyone possibly get confused? I think they did a reasonable job in this manual of trying to lay it all out, but that is a whole bunch of text with arrows pointing at things arrayed around a diagram that they drew to try and make that all clear. So I just found that a little bit humorous. They show the connecting 17.1 channels of speakers, but do remind you that only 15 of them will be used at any given time. There is that tactile transducer output. You can change one of the 4 subwoofer preouts to the tactile transducer. They let you change the level on the fly using the options menu. If you go into the actual speaker settings, you can change the level and the low pass filter that is applied to it. So I like that. That means you can connect any amplifier to power your tactile transducers. It doesn't have to be a specifically tactile transducer amplifier that has its own low pass filter built in. The AV receiver will take care of that for you. I did want to mention the auto surround. Right? So that's one of the things that we've complained about in the past, that if you use the auto listening mode, it used to always default to using the up mixer. They've changed that. Now they clearly say that if you're playing back something like Dolby Digital or DTS, the music will be played back according to the respective channel number of the original signal. So they did the thing we wanted them to do with auto the whole time. Now, if you just want things to play back the way they came in, that's what auto is going to do now. So I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. Another one that we mentioned recently on the podcast, the loudness management has a thing called dynamic compression, and it used to be that for everything other than Dolby True HD and Atmos signals, the dynamic compression was default set to off. But for some reason, it was written up in the older AV receiver models that dynamic compression would be set to auto, specifically for Dolby True HD and Atmos signals. And you would have to manually turn that off. Well, now the default is just off for everything. So they fixed that. That's nice. They still have their horrible thing where you can send the bass from, say, your front left speaker only to your front left subwoofer rather than to all the subwoofers. So that's in there. That didn't change. But the default is that all the bass just gets summed together and sent to all 4 subwoofers or 3 or 2 subwoofers simultaneously. So that's all right. And then one interesting thing, it actually has 4 XLR outputs for the 4 subwoofers. There are 4 RCA outputs for the subs or 4 XLR outputs for the subs. You can reassign those XLR outputs to be your front, left, right, and center speakers. So that's the thing that somebody over there was like, hey, we've got these XLR outputs. Could we use those for speakers instead of subs? And I'm like, well, what do you know? We're going to put the relays in there so that you can. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit. And that was it.
I don't understand why one of these pictures has 5 subwoofers in it.
I don't know.
It's very strange. Like, they all are normal except for the up-firing speaker one where it's got 5 subwoofers in it.
Let me see if I can find that.
It's very strange.
I'm seeing something I'm not seeing. Oh, yeah. Yeah, look at that. Okay,
there's a fifth little subwoofer just sitting over there going, "Hey,
nobody
look over here."
There's a sub between
the
front left and the center, a sub between the front right and the center, but then a sub between the front right and the front right wide. Yeah, they drew an extra one in there. Somebody did something when they were just like putting them in there in Photoshop or however it is that they laid out this diagram.
But it's not a copy paste of the other ones either because it's smaller.
That's right. That's a funny scrub. I'm
this is and of course all the speakers are angled directly at
of course,
the person, which is why I wrote the article about Dolby diagrams being wrong.
These aren't Dolbys though; these are Denons.
I know, but it was referring to basically all of these diagrams are like this, and it drives me absolutely bonkers. So yes, this is no different. Do not aim all the speakers at your face. Please stop.
In all the diagrams, there's only one guy sitting on his couch right in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, let me look at him again. I always forget. Yeah, he's 3-seater couch, but he has no friends.
That's right.
Okay.
I mean, it's fair to assume that if you installed 17 speakers and 4 subwoofers, you might be single. That's not necessarily an unreasonable assumption.
Then you have one extra subwoofer that you bring in and out just from time to time.
Yeah, some people did tweet back when I showed the diagrams. They're like, yeah, I showed this to my wife, and she had a look of shock. And I'm like, that's because she didn't realize you were depriving her of all those speakers all this time, right? All those
speakers. That's right.
That was the reason your wife was shocked.
Everybody needs to keep this photo on their phone someplace, so the next time you want to have a conversation with your significant other about the number of speakers you have and how many more you should buy, you say, well, this is what they think I should have.
That's right.
And I'm not going for this. I'm going for less than this. Then suddenly you seem less crazy.
That's right.
You're still crazy. You listen to this podcast. So you're still crazy, but you're not nearly as crazy. Let's get to some questions here.
Yeah.
Enough making fun of stupid companies and their stupid decisions. Steve was using a Bose Cinemate soundbar, which claims to play back 5.1 audio. He decided he wanted to try regular speakers instead, so he used an older Marantz slimline receiver, an NR1403, to power 3 Wharfedale speakers up front, plus a subwoofer, no surround speakers. While the sound quality was great, and a nice improvement over the Bose soundbar, he did feel as though the sense of envelopment was missing, but his wife didn't really want any of the speakers installed at the back of the room, so he decided to try an experiment. He got a pair of some of the least expensive upward-firing Atmos modules from Sony. He put those on top of his front left and right bookshelf speakers, exactly the way the upward-firing Atmos modules would go, but he just connected them to the surround speaker binding post of his receiver, and so they're playing the surround channels. It sounds kind of great. Sure, it isn't pinpoint surround placement, but the sense of envelopment is there, and they actually sound as though the surround effects are coming from about where the in-ceiling surrounds might have gone. All of the 5.1 and Atmos soundbars that don't actually have any additional speakers, they're just using phase trickery and trying to bounce sounds off walls and ceilings too, right? So do we think his solution is crazy or actually a decent compromise? His wife doesn't have any complaints this way, and it basically sounds like a souped up version of his Bose soundbar, but better. What are our thoughts? You already answered it.
Oh, yeah.
When you said it kind of sounds okay, in which case, what am I going to say? No, it doesn't. What am I going to say? No, yeah, I wouldn't have done it. I'm be honest with you. There's no world in which that thought would have occurred to me to do this. But I'm glad you mentioned it because it's actually a reasonable thing to mention, and the fact that so the problem with upward firing modules, and I've talked about it a number of times on this podcast, is placement. To get them to work well, you need to have them placed properly, and it's not always the top of the speakers that they are said to want to be on top of.
Right.
So you're lucky, basically. They happen to work pretty well there. And the fact that they're coming from over your head, which is kind of where there's, like you said, in-ceiling surrounds, if you had them, would be. Which, of course, a lot of people install or had installed in the past. But this is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Now, I don't recall going back to the Slimline NR1403 whether that had any of the virtual surround modes, because that is one of the things you could have tried, or you could still try if it's in there. Like sometimes in the listening mode selection, there's like a virtual mode where what it does is, if you don't have physical surround speakers or physical surround and surround back speakers, the virtual listening mode will attempt to do a similar, like you say, phase trickery type of thing like the sound bars do, right? When you get one of those single sound bars, doesn't have any other speakers that physically go behind you at all, but they still say it's a 5.1 sound bar. That's what they're doing. They're doing some timing and some phase trickery. Some of them are maybe trying to actually bounce sounds like Yamaha's, digital sound projectors, but most of them aren't even doing that. It is all just phase adjustment. The same type of thing that you might do in headphones, where you clearly just have two sound sources, but by decorrelating some of the sound, you can try and make it seem as though things are coming from behind you or above you, that type of thing. So that same type of processing, sometimes there's just a listening mode built into the AV receiver because they know not everyone actually has 5 physical speakers. So if your NR1403 has that, I think it would be an interesting experiment to try that, to see whether you can get that sense of envelopment just through a sound mode, or whether these upward firing speakers connected to the surround outputs, sound significantly different than what the just virtualized sound mode is able to do. That would just be, something I would try out purely for fun. But I have zero beef with you having done with this. If it enhances the experience for you and your wife is happy with it, well, that absolutely answers the question there. I think he was just, teasing this as like, is there something anybody else would try? I think clearly, if you have the type of setup where you can optimally place your surround speakers as the diagrams show them, I think we're still going to favor that. Sure. We're not going to say that this is the superior setup, but absolutely, a compromise like this is part of the fun of home theater, that you can do this type of thing. Because what does it hurt? It doesn't hurt anything to give it a try. So I'm absolutely on board with this, and I'd be interested to see how it compares to the virtual surround mode.
Just tell everybody it's an Atmos setup. They won't know. They won't know. RAF has a Denon X8500H. One of its settings is called Bass Sync. Yeah. What does it do? When would you use it? I don't know what that is. So what is it, Rob?
So I'll just read verbatim what it says in the manual. It says, for contents recorded in multi-channel such as Blu-ray discs, the recorded low-frequency effects, the LFE, might be out of sync and delayed. This function corrects such a delay of low-frequency effects. You have the option of setting it to 0 milliseconds up to 16 milliseconds, the default being 0, and then mentions a few things in there. How low-frequency effects are delayed differs according to the disc. So this is not some kind of universal setting. You're adjusting this according to each disc. Set this to the desired value. No instruction on how to determine that. Bass sync settings are stored for each input source. So I guess if one of your inputs always delays the LFE channel versus the other channel for some reason, okay, that's a nice thing. This can be set when LFE signals are included in the input signal, of course, not when they're not, and cannot be set when it's direct or pure direct, or when you're using the 7.1 analog inputs. None of that really clears up exactly what's going on here. I have no idea how you would determine that low frequency effects, right? The highest frequency you'll find in the actual low frequency effects channel is 120 hertz. Like, that's not voices. That's not any type of sharp sounding sound effect where you might notice. Like, it's not like somebody claps their hands and then the sound of the clap doesn't happen for a few milliseconds. Like, you might be able to see that sort of thing. In the deep bass, 120 hertz or lower, how would you even notice that? I don't know what this is for. I don't know. I honestly don't. I don't know how you would ever notice.
Isn't like a huge
60
delay.
Milliseconds is nothing.
Yeah, it would be hard to notice that full stop.
Yeah, I sure would.
But when you're talking about an explosion, which a lot of times you assume the explosion is the sound is slightly delayed because you're seeing it from further back.
Yeah,
it wouldn't even look unnatural for it to be delayed.
Sure,
16 milliseconds.
I don't know what
this is. Somebody's pet project. If you're wondering,
somebody analyzed the waveform of a Dolby Digital signal, and they're like, "Hey,
on
turns
one
out
disc,
the LFE was out of phase." It's a bizarre one. I honestly can't tell you when I would use this. The default is 0, and I would 100% leave it there. I have zero idea how you would determine that you need to use this. And they even say right on their own thing, it's on a disc by disc basis or source by source basis.
I guess it's those people who do the, what's it called? When they have the mini DSPs and they set their EQs differently for each movie.
Yeah, the
That's
BEQ,
how you
the bass
use
EQ.
this. Yeah, you would
have to analyze the signal in a non-audible way. This would have to be decoded, and I don't know. I have no idea why you would ever use this.
Stefan says, for a bedroom TV setup, would we recommend getting a soundbar? If so, which one? Or would we suggest going with the bookshelf speaker setup instead? If you went with the bookshelf speaker route, he already has a spare subwoofer on hand that he could pair them with, and in either case, his max budget would be around $1,000. Well, Rob has a soundbar that he always recommends. I lean towards powered bookshelf speakers if you can fit them. And
to be clear, I would too, especially with this budget. You'd be able to get something that is definitely superior to a soundbar, in my opinion.
Monoprice has those new monster ones that just came out with that are like ludicrously large.
The MTM ones, yeah.
They're and they have side-firing woofers on them. I haven't reviewed them or really taken a close look at them, but those probably... I don't even know you would need a subwoofer in a bedroom for something like that. I mean, obviously you do want one to get the lowest bass notes, but I question everybody who says I need to have a subwoofer in my bedroom, unless that's where they primarily watch TV.
I don't question that, because the bass coming from your front left and right speakers might be pretty darn different.
I'm not
from the left side of the bed
disagreeing with that, but I don't think they want to have any more bass than what they already have in their bedroom. They want to sleep.
I want more even bass. That's what
they're watching John Oliver or whatever, and they're trying to fall asleep. They're not trying to hear Batman's rumbly voice at the lowest octave. But yeah, there's the. I did the Fluence speakers, which sounded pretty nice.
Sure.
There's a ton of other powered bookshelf speakers out there.
Yeah, I think going for powered makes the most sense here. Now, there are oodles of them out there. Most of them will just have an optical audio input. So one thing I did want to mention is having an optical audio output is not a given on all of today's TVs. Quite a few TVs now are forgoing having the optical audio output because they really are just relying on HDMI ARC to get sound out of TVs now. So it's not necessarily a given that your TV does have an optical audio port. That used to be pretty much a given, but not 100% anymore. So just to say, I will mention that soundbar is the only soundbar I feel comfortable recommending to people, because I think anything that's less expensive than this sounds really, really bad, and the ones that are more expensive don't make sense to me because I don't think they sound good enough to justify considerably higher prices. But Vizio's M512H6 is normally priced at $500. It is a genuine 5.1.2 soundbar. It actually has two upward firing drivers. It's not just doing virtualization. So there really are that channel count. And then the two surround speakers, physically separate surround speakers, they actually plug in with a wire to the subwoofer. So typically you'll actually position the subwoofer somewhere closer to the rear of the room and then have those wires coming out of the wireless sub. The sub connects wirelessly to the soundbar at the front, but then there are physical wires going from the sub to the two surround speakers. It's on sale at Best Buy for $400 right now. That happens quite often. They run that sale. So for $400, that is a soundbar that I feel happy recommending to people. I think it sounds pretty darn good, and at that price, you're probably not going to get all of those features for any less money than that, and things that cost less than this sound significantly worse. So I do like that soundbar. But in general, I agree with Tom, especially when your budget is upwards of $1,000 and you already have a sub that you could connect. So we've mentioned, there's lots of options from Klipsch and Fluence and Audio Engine and multiple other companies. Pretty much any speaker company now you can probably find a self-powered speaker in their lineup with at least an optical input. But I wanted to spotlight some that have HDMI inputs on them, because we're getting powered bookshelf speakers now that include HDMI inputs, and they are certainly within the price range that you're talking about. So one of them, of course, will be SVS's new Prime Wireless Pro speakers. These are big speakers. Don't think that these are compact. It's 5.5-inch woofer in there. These are sizable bookshelf speakers, but I don't have the Pro version. I have the Prime Wireless version that my parents use. I went through a significant number of soundbars trying to find them a good solution. None of them can hold a candle to what the SVS Prime Wireless Originals can do, and these ones are even larger and play even louder and the Prime Wireless Pro. So those go for $900, available in both a black and a white finish, and they do now have have an HDMI ARC port on the back of it and come with a remote as well, which the original Prime Wireless didn't. So these are a very good solution for a TV setup. And of course, being SVS, it does have a dedicated subwoofer pre-out. And when you connect that subwoofer pre-out, it employs a crossover in there. So it does all the things correctly. And I can pretty much guarantee is going to beat the pants off of any soundbar just in terms of sound quality and sheer output capability. Another one you could look at is Kef's LSX2. Similarly, the original LSX didn't have an HDMI ARC input. The LSX2 does. Now, these are normally priced at $1,400, but Accessories for Less has them at $1,000. They're exactly at your budget. I just think the styling on these is really nice. I like the looks of them. The sound quality of anything in that LS series from Kef is really, really nice. So those would be ones I would consider for sure. And then if you want the price to be a bit lower, ELAC has a good option now. These are relatively new. ELAC's debut series connects DCB41. And what's nice here is they're priced at $600 for the pair, so quite a bit less than the SVS Prime Wireless Pro or the Kef LSX2 speakers. The ELAC debut connects DCB41s. They also have an HDMI ARC port on the back of them. And they're on sale for $500 right now, which is, I think, going to be a pretty common thing going with those. So good options there. And yeah, if you care about the sound quality most, I would get one of those bookshelf speaker options. And I think there's really quite affordable ones that include ARC now, so I like that.
All right, and I put down the Fluence ones that I reviewed, and they have an optical and RCA, and I really, I mean, and a subwoofer output. So there's while HDMI is nice, it's certainly not necessary. You just have to make sure whatever you buy can connect to your TV.
That's right, yeah. I just wanted to spotlight those ones because I am seeing TVs now that don't have optical audio outputs anymore. So I'm like, it's not necessarily that you can just freely recommend self-powered speakers and be confident there's going to be an easy way to connect them. It's just something to be aware of now. Yeah.
Juls in the UK. Juls made the decision to get some printed acoustic panels. He's already got some images he'd like to use, but since they're going to be blown up to the size of absorption panels, he's thinking they could use some upscaling. Surely with all the AI image processing out there, it must be possible to do really high quality upscaling, right? But which site should he use? Like, I don't know what images he's trying to use here. I don't know if they're his own or something he found online, and he's not incorrect. Now, even with AI image, scaling or whatever, you're still trying to make pixels out of nothing. So you want to start with the most number of pixels that you possibly can. Mm-hmm. And one thing that people don't often realize is that PDFs are they tend to be like better than JPEGs or any of the other things as far as being able to scale them. They scale very nicely as compared to other things. This is just something that like I know from having book covers done and other things. Like a lot of times you like just ask for it in a PDF and then you can do with it whatever you want. You can blow it up huge and it'll still stay relatively good looking. But if you want to know what you're getting yourself into, you put it into an image manipulator like GIMP or just about anything, and then scale it up yourself and to the proper size, and then just zoom in on it and see how pixelated it looks. And if it's an image that you've gotten from elsewhere, you're certainly going to be you want to be very careful that you are getting the highest quality that you possibly can.
Yeah, and your starting point.
Yeah, surprisingly, it doesn't have to be as it doesn't have to be as big as you think it does, as long as it's in like a PDF format, or if it's in something that's more scalable than like a JPEG, which a lot of times will just
those could look pretty bad. But yeah, I'll mention, like, I don't have a ton of experience with this, so I was relying on outside reviews and examples and things like that. But one that seems quite promising, the one that I would probably just at least give a try, because you can try it for free, and then the cost of using it, if you're not going to be using it on a really ongoing basis, is really quite reasonable. So there's one called Image Larger, image just spelled IMG, take out all the vowels, but imglarger.com. Yeah, this one, it won a lot of sort of shootouts. And like I say, one thing that's nice in this is that they've got a whole bunch of different features, and they sort of do it on a credits-based system. So like the most basic upscaling, you can do that as much as you want. But then if you want to do some other manipulation of it, cartoonize it, denoise it, alter the background, those types of things, they let you do that based on sort of like a credit-based system. So it's like a pay-per-use type of system, which is actually a little bit more fair than the way a lot of the other online AI-based image manipulators do things. So, like I say, you can try it for free. Now, there are limitations in terms of what you're able to upload and how much you're able to scale, and how many times you can use those credits. They give you 8 free credits just to try. But my point here is you can give their processing a try for free, 0 risk. They do require you to create an account to do that free trial, but creating the account doesn't cost any money. And then if you do want to use it and you're using it on a limited basis like this, you can do it month by month, and it's $9 for a single month. That gives you 100 credits and removes the limitations on what you can upload. So I think that's a pretty low risk, to give it a try. If the most you might be paying is $9 one time. So when you're using the free one, they won't let you upload anything that's larger than 1200 by 1200 pixels. So like Tom was talking about, when you're starting with the best quality image that you can begin with, well, that might be lower than that limitation for the free version, but it gives you an idea of what their AI upscaling can do. And then, like I say, you've got the 8 free credits to try some of the other things. But if you do that $9 for a month, you can increase the size by 8 times. You can upload things that are 4,000 by 4,000 to begin, and then increase them 8 times larger than that, for $9. And then you've got 100 credits to do a bunch of different things, manipulating the backgrounds or other things. So I think that's pretty reasonable to give a try. A lot of the other ones either cost more, or didn't have as many features, or had more limitations, or ran more ads, or in some of the shootouts just didn't do as nice a job of the upscaling, like removed people's eyelashes and things like that, which this one doesn't seem to do. So I think that's worth a try anyway.
All right. John has an LG G2 OLED and an Xbox Series X that's positioned across the room, necessitating a long ultra high-speed HDMI cable. He bought the AVRant fiber optic ultra high-speed HDMI cable that we've been recommending for several weeks now, but when he hooked it up, his Xbox refused to output anything other than 640 by 480. That's 4K.
There's a 4 in there.
There's a 4. I see it right there. Which should look insane and squished and terrible. He got an exchange from Amazon, but the replacement cable had the same problem. After an email with Rob, John said he made sure the HDMI cable was plugged in the correct way, because there's a source side plugged into Xbox and the display side plugged into TV. His OLED's HDMI port was set to have Ultra HD deep color on. He wasn't using any sort of wall plate or HDMI pigtail. Furthermore, he moved his Xbox close to his TV and used the HDMI cable that came with the Xbox, and that all worked perfectly. So it isn't just the HDMI ports on either the Xbox or the TV itself. So any idea what might be going on here? And is there an alternative long length, ultra high speed HDMI cable we could point to, since 2 of the AVRant cables were both failures? He trusts Blue Jeans. Do they not have an option? Not for 50 feet. I don't think they do.
No, so Blue Jeans has started selling some ultra high speed certified cables, but the longest length they're offering is 3 meters. So about 10 feet. So they don't have anything that's in the sort of 50-foot length that we were looking for here. So I mean, I'm very discouraged to hear this. I didn't mention this to John, and it occurred to me basically when I was writing up the topic list here for today. I was like, is there some chance that they actually mislabeled the 2 sides? And that reversing the cable actually, I don't know if he tried that, but that reversing the cable might have actually worked. Because what this sounds like, to be limited to that, 640 by 480, which makes no sense. Even if the ultra high speed weren't working, you would at least get 1080p, because being limited to 640 by 480 makes no sense at all. But what would make sense is if it were trying to do that with the bandwidth of the HDMI eARC connection only, the pathway that goes back from the display back down to the source, because there is an eARC channel built into these, and that is, of course, very bandwidth limited. It's only meant to carry audio signals, not video, but 640 by 480 might be about the only video resolution that would fit through the bandwidth available in the eARC channel. So I'm like, all along, I was just expecting to hear back that, okay, it actually turns out I plugged it in the wrong way. But now I'm wondering, he made darn sure he's plugging it. I'm like, is there any chance they manufactured it with the labels backwards? Because that's about the only thing I can think of. It absolutely should not be like this. Is it out of the realm of possibility to get, a bad batch, 2 back-to-back that were just incorrect, and most of the time these actually do work, but the 2 that he somehow got were faulty, clearly faulty. It's not out of the realm of possibility that he just got really bad luck, but I'm really sorry to hear this, something that I recommended and it gave him this hassle.
Well, it's not just us that recommends it either. I've seen this recommendation for this particular cable multiple times.
Because it's one of the certified ones. Yeah. It's in-wall rated, which a lot of the other ones aren't, and it's at a reasonable price. So other people found the same thing and were trusting it based on the certification, just like I was. So, I mean, here again, I'm putting this recommendation. They're going to say, do we have an alternative? This is one I mentioned long time ago, because this was the first ultra high speed long length certified cable that I came across. Was from a company called Rui Pro, RUI Pro. They charge a little bit more. Like the ABLink one is about $80 for the 50-foot. This is $105 for the 50-foot. So, I mean, it's not crazy more expensive, but it's a bit more expensive. But it's certified in-wall rated. So, again, it's one of the very, very few that has those two things. Because, like, mono prices are certified, but not in-wall rated. And then other ones that might be in-wall rated are not certified. So, this is another option that I can throw out there. I have no guarantee that it's actually going to work better. It's got good reviews at Amazon, which is kind of a rarity. Usually you're only getting negative reviews for a lot of things, and this one has very positive reviews, almost 5-star across the board. So somebody got it working. You wouldn't have all of those reviews. It's got lots of reviews because, again, like I say, it was one of the first ones that had the certification. So I'd be willing to give the Rui Pro a try, but yeah, I have no guarantees. Similar to the ABLink, it's possible to get a lemon, I suppose. So yeah, that's about all I can really say on that one.
Like I said, it's the manufacturer backwards thing is interesting, but I've seen lots of people suggest this and then have people report back that it worked. So I am too surprised, but again, anything can happen. So hopefully he gets it sorted out. If he hasn't already returned it, and give it a flip and see if that was the case. That would be funny though. Anders, who is a Dane, but he's living in Sweden.
Yes, he originally signed his email, Dane or Anders in Sweden, but then he clarified. He's like, to be clear, I'm Danish originally. It was very important that we know.
Well, of course, yeah. At least we didn't call him Finnish. I understand. I
know.
I think that's problematic over there. I don't know what the problem is.
Clutch your pearls.
I have no idea what any of that, what's going on with any of the whitest people in the world being mad at each other for being a different kind of white. But Anders, you're a Dane, and we ordain you so, or verify. First time question asker, long time listener, although maybe not that long compared to some. Several years ago, Anders put together quite an extensive audio system. Both stereo and surround sound listening are a real passion of his, so he was happy to dedicate a considerable amount of funds towards his equipment. But sadly, back in 2012, he suffered a stroke. And since then, he hasn't had the same amount of disposable income, understandably. Mm-hmm. So upgrades are few and far between. Furthermore, it is difficult for him to concentrate intently for long periods of time as he experiences mental fatigue. So these are just some of the things he hopes we can keep in mind while we discuss his questions. All right.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's
me too.
I mean, nothing anybody can do about that sort of thing, unfortunately. So, but I'm sorry to hear that, Anders.
First up, he'd like to describe his audio system. It's basically divided into two parts: a stereo only part, and a surround sound part. Mm-hmm. The two parts work together for the surround sound purposes, which is, we've seen this before. Mm-hmm. The stereo only system is a class A. Yeah.
That's part of Sound United, or Massimo now.
Yeah. Yes. CP800 MK2 stereo preamp connected to two Class A 2-channel amplifiers in the bi-amp configuration. He has a 2x100 watt Class A CA2100 powering just the highs, and a 2x200 watt Class A CA2200 powering just the lows. Mm-hmm. His speakers are a pair of B&W 802 D2 Diamond Towers plus a pair of B&W ASW 800 series subwoofers with one sub just to the side of each tower and set up as a stereo subwoofers. Each sub is being fed a full range signal, as are his biamp B&W towers. Sources are the Class A, whatever. 202 CD player, a Mitchell Audio Gyrotech turntable going into a Rotel Phono preamp.
I had to put that in there because that he wants us to know the exact brands and models.
At this
for
point,
the 2-channel crowd, it's important.
It's very important. That's right. I feel like I'm reading the beginning of an audiophile review, and you know how I feel about audiophiles, but whatever. He can also use streaming music services from CP800, which I already forgot what that is, but whatever.
That's his pre-pro, his stereo pre-pro. Yes.
Forgot again. He is fully convinced that an all analog single chain is important, and he was when he was buying all of this equipment and comparing some extremely expensive setups, he felt that, if anything, after the initial sources digitized the signal, at any point the soundstage collapsed. So any benefits of converting to digital were outweighed by the cost of the sound quality. For the surround sound setup, he has a Class A SSP 800, another 800, so that'll be easy to keep all these things straight. Prepo connected to a 5x200 watt Rotel 1095 amplifier that powers his center, surrounds, and surround back speakers, which again are all B&W. His stereo preamp has a dedicated SSP input, which essentially turns his stereo-only system into a straight amplifier. No volume control or filtering applied by the stereo preamp at all, and the RCA outputs on the stereo preamp do not send any signal to his stereo subwoofers in this configuration, so he's able to send the subwoofer signal from his surround processor instead. Oh, for the love of God, thank you. For finally to the questions. Here are the questions.
Yes.
After all
Tom
that,
has mental fatigue as well. He
I
can commiserate.
too have the mental of the fatigues, yes, but I am not mocking him. I am mocking myself for being a little sick right now. I'm sorry. Surprise, surprise. Beginning a stereo subwoofers integrated so they sound correct for both stereo only listening and surround sound has been a challenge. The instructions on the manuals for his Class A processors, B&W subwoofers, seem lacking when it comes to stereo subwoofer setup. B&W's manual said to just listen to a wide variety of materials and adjust the taste. That hardly seems precise. This is audiophiles. It's not supposed to be precise. It's supposed to be subjective. He is familiar with playing the individual channels level pink noise and measuring with an SPL meter for his surround sound setup. But should he just be aiming for the same SPL meter reading on his subwoofers? And should they be measured and adjusted one at a time, or both subs playing together? Overall, what is the procedure for adjusting his stereo subwoofer setup so that he can have the correct subwoofer output levels for both his stereo only and his surround sound setups? I mean, don't do any of this, I guess, would be my unfortunate answer to this.
Well, I mean, yeah, so I want to preface all this by saying I'm going to attempt to answer his question as written without trying to completely reprogram everything he believes about audio setups, but we have to say, like, our entire approach to setting up any system with subwoofers, and to be clear, Tom and I would include subwoofers in every audio system we set up, if possible. But our entire philosophical and technical approach to setting up subwoofers is diametrically opposed to stereo subwoofers and what you've done.
Like, wrote an article that's like, stop putting both your subwoofers at the front of your room.
At the front of the room,
so, which is what you have done. So if that doesn't clue you into my belief system when it comes to subwoofers, I don't know what will. So, I mean, to try and put it in the easiest to convey and I think simplest to understand terms, what you've done, like, intuitively makes all the sense in the world. That's the hard part of this. Yes. Yeah. You know, I can fully understand anybody thinking, particularly stereo only. Okay, I'm listening to a turntable, clearly, or a CD player, or just a streaming stereo source. And all I have in the signal are two full range signals. I have full range going to front left. I have full range going to front right. That's how the signal started. So intuitively, it makes all the sense in the world to say, I'm going to send a full range signal to a front left tower and a full range signal to a front right tower. But even with towers as capable as the 802 diamonds, there's this little part of the frequency range right at the bottom that the speaker itself cannot play.
Or I've simply heard in even audiophile circles that, yes, you can augment that bass output of even very capable tower speakers because given a certain room, the tower speakers are not necessarily going to be able to output all the bass that is included in the signal. So let's augment those front, left, and right towers, add a subwoofer to each tower, in essence, turning what is a three-way speaker, right? So your speaker has a dedicated tweeter, a dedicated mid-range, and then multiple bass woofers set up in a three-way design. Those three sections cross over to each other. Having added the subwoofer to it, turns it, in this case, not into a four-way speaker. You've turned it into a 3.5-way speaker because your bass drivers are in the tower speakers are still playing all the way down as low as they possibly can. They are not being filtered off or sent into a crossover. But the dedicated subwoofer you have for each channel is being filtered off at the top end of the subwoofer. So you've created a 3.5-way speaker, a front left 3.5-way and a front right 3.5-way when you're doing stereo only. So conceptually, I consider that a top-down approach. It's saying I have a speaker that I know plays the treble and the mid-range and the mid-bass really well, but then at the very bottom, I want to augment that. So I'm just going to add this individual subwoofer to each speaker to try and get right down to 20 hertz, where maybe the speaker can't quite go, or to just augment that lowest bass because I've got a large room and the towers can't quite fully fill it up. Or I notice that, in some musical passages, the bass from just the speaker by itself sounds a bit too quiet or a bit too loud, or it's just unbalanced with the rest of the frequencies. So maybe if I augment that with a subwoofer at the bottom end, that's what's going to sort it out. Totally understand the thinking. But for Tom and I, our approach is bottom up. We don't think top down, how well do our speakers play? How low do my speakers go? And then what do I need to augment at the bottom? We go bottom up. We say we start with the subwoofers alone, by themselves, just the subwoofers. And we try to lay this very uniform, linear, accurate foundation. And we try to achieve this uniform, linear, accurate foundation of deep bass right up to where we would cross them over to our speakers. So we try to get to 80 hertz, maybe a bit higher, maybe up to 120 hertz if possible. But we try to achieve that with two or more subwoofers as the starting point, and then have our speakers introduced into the system above that, not augmented to it, not supplemental in that deep bass, but sitting on top of it like a foundation of bass, trying to mess up what we've achieved with our multiple subwoofers as little as possible. And that means employing bass management and a crossover. So our real answer to all of this is that we would fully deploy your subwoofers in a different manner than what you've done. And I don't know how amenable you'll be to that idea. I don't know how willing you'll be to consider the notion of a bottom-up approach where we would reposition your two subwoofers. We wouldn't even physically keep them where you have them right now. We would either have one at the front of the room and one at the back of the room, or have them at the midpoints of your two side walls. Or perhaps have them diagonally across from each other. But we would have them across the room from each other. We wouldn't have them both up at the front. And then we would use that positioning in your two subwoofers to try and create as uniform and linear bass as we could, and then employ crossovers. All of which would be a challenge if we continued using your analog-only stereo preamp, which doesn't have bass management. It only outputs full range signals. And what we would end up suggesting to you is using only your surround sound processor. We don't really see a need for you to have that separate analog only stereo preamplifier. We would use the Class A surround sound processor for all purposes because it is entirely capable of outputting the front, left, and right signals. But it can do so with bass management. It can employ a crossover at the bottom of your front, left, and right speakers. So it would simplify the setup. it would create a scenario where your subwoofers are always being driven by the same pre-outs, always being the surround sound pre-outs. And we would have a crossover employed at all times. We would simply switch it to stereo listening mode when it's time to listen to your 2-channel content. So that's our real answer in terms of the procedure of how we would fix it. Now, what that, of course, allows you to do, now that you're only using the surround sound processor, is go through a standard setup with the pink noise for each channel. You would be outputting the same mono, not stereo bass signal anymore. It would be a mono signal going to both of your subwoofers. We would have physically repositioned your 2 subwoofers. And now when you do that pink noise test...
None of this can be a surprise, right? None of this advice can be a surprise.
He says, fairly long-time listeners. So,
he had to know what we were going to say, that we weren't going to suddenly...
One might think, but I want to go through it very clearly and respectfully, hopefully. I hope it's sounding respectful to the way I'm saying it, because, if you're asking us, if you ask somebody else, they might give you a different answer. And it might be more along...
You can definitely find somebody that's going to give you the answer you want.
Yeah.
Which is, listen to this specific track and,
yeah,
play with phase and make sure you time align your 2 subwoofers and all this other garbage that's out there that's not true. But or won't help. But
this was a very well written, clearly time spent on an email that was sent to us. So I have to believe he was looking for our answer to this. That this wasn't in error or a brand new person who had no idea what type of thing we were going to say. So I don't want to shirk our normal answer and not say what we believe is the best way to do what you're trying to achieve, which is having the confidence that whatever you're listening to, whether it's stereo, surround sound, whatever, that you actually are hearing the bass precisely and accurately as the signal called for. This is the way that we would do it, and it doesn't require you buying anything new. That's the good news. This isn't a financial outlay for you to do it the way that we said. In fact, you might be able to sell your Class A stereo preamp, which I guarantee you would still fetch a good price, and even end up with money in your pocket. But yeah, given everything that you've said, I have my doubts that that's what you're going to want to do. So the best answer that I can give you without changing any of the configuration of your system, if you're convinced that this is the way you want to set it up, and look, it's your system, okay? I'm not going to tell you that you're not allowed to enjoy your system the way that you want to, and simply try to compromise your way to the best setup you can, having connected it in a way that we would not recommend. But that's okay. It's your system to do with as you please. The only way I know how to come close to doing what you want to do would be I would have your surround sound processor set up as a configuration of no subwoofers. I would tell your surround sound processor in its setup that you do not have any subwoofers, and therefore all of the bass, including the low frequency effects channel, gets rerouted to your front left and right speakers, which you've been running full range this whole time. So this is no problem as far as your surround sound processor goes. You're just going to tell it, I don't have any subwoofers. So now that removes the issue of potentially having a different output level when it comes from the surround sound processor versus the stereo preamp. Now the bass is coming out of those subwoofers from being fed through the surround sound processor at all times. That means instead of having the XLR output going to just the speaker amplifier and then the RCA output going to the subwoofer, I would now have a 3-way split. Right? I would have the exact same signal coming out of the surround sound processor, the exact same signal going to your speaker amplifiers and your subwoofer. No more separating those two things, because you're still going to be using that surround sound input on your stereo preamp. So now what we've done is created just full range signals going to your front, left, and right, but the low frequency effects are going to be included in those full range signals now. Now the only thing I can suggest is to play a sweep through just the front left channel and just the front right channel. I don't like B&W's advice of play a variety of content and adjust the volume of the subwoofer and the crossover of the subwoofer to taste. No, I'm going to do that with something more predictable where I know what the signal was asking for, and that's going to be a bass sweep. But now you can play that bass sweep just from the front left, just from the front right, and it will be trial and error, but you're going to use the trial and error to try and get that most smooth and even blend from the top of the sweep all the way down to the bottom of the sweep. Trial and error, adjusting the crossover and volume of one subwoofer at a time, because they're only playing the front left out of the left subwoofer and the front right out of the right subwoofer. So it's not a ridiculous amount of trial and error to do it that way. I wouldn't anticipate that if you have, say, a 3-seater couch and you listen to the bass sweep in all 3 seats of that couch, that this is going to give you the same response in all 3 seats. That is the problem with stereo-based setups and having one subwoofer dedicated to just the left and one subwoofer dedicated to just the right. You end up with different bass response from seat to seat. But if you really only care about one seat, you can adjust it to have pretty reasonable response for that one seat if you do it this way. And now you know that when a full range signal comes to the front left channel, you play that sweep, it's nice and even sounding the whole way down. The same thing will apply when you switch to surround sound, and now all of the bass, including the LFE, is being sent to your front left and right. So that's the procedure I would use for not changing your setup. A little tweak to your setup, because I would have the stereo preamp sending the exact same signal to the speakers and to the subwoofer. That's just so your surround sound input on that preamp will continue to work as it should. And then I would tweak the settings in the surround sound processor to say you don't have a subwoofer so that the LFE gets sent full range. So hopefully that makes sense. I am very sympathetic to what's going on with it being difficult to concentrate. That was a long answer I just gave.
You should have put in like intermissions in that response.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be incomplete though for the sake of brevity. So thankfully this is a podcast, so you can pause and rewind and re-listen and take it in chunks. But I hope that's going to be a satisfactory answer.
All right. Rob covered basically everything I was going to say. I also included some links here that Rob will include in the show notes that will cover some of the things that either Rob said or that I would have said. So
you can see it written instead of only listening. Yeah.
That's right. So, to continue, he's using both a TV and the projector with a motorized screen. The TV is 4K, but the projector is the Epson TW9100, same as the 5020 UB in North America. So it is 1080p only, and its Class A surround sound processor cannot pass through any 4K signals, so we can probably see where this is going. For the most part, he's actually been getting by just fine. He uses both a Nopo BDP95 and the Panasonic UB9000 for disc playback, and both these have 2 separate HDMI outputs, so he's able to send the best quality video to his 4K TV while sending the best possible audio to his audio system. But he uses an Apple TV 4K and not only has a single HDMI output, he has resorted to plugging it straight into the TV and using an optical connection back to his Pre-Pro. But that means he isn't getting the best audio quality, best possible audio quality. And when he switches between his TV and his projector, his Apple TV 4K insists on doing a complete system setup every time, which is annoying.
Yeah.
So he was thinking maybe he'll just get a second Apple TV, since they aren't terribly expensive anymore, but he would still be limited to optical audio quality, so it would be better to get some sort of HDMI splitter, which would cost a lot more. He wouldn't mind upgrading his projector or even his Class A Pre-Pro to support all the latest video standards, but he isn't in a financial position to do so right now. So what's his best solution here? Isn't that the one that has the pass-through? No, that BDP95?
Oh, going back that far.
Is it?
I think it was you had to get to the 100 series before. I'm not sure. I didn't look that up beforehand. Quick. Yeah. Although would that? Well, yeah, I suppose if it's able to do the separation inside
if it can
of
do
it,
the separation, it should be able to do it. Where is?
Okay, Tom's looking that one. Yeah, because that might be the thing. Maybe you end up plugging your Apple TV 4K into your Oppo player if it is the one that has the HDMI input. Although BDP95, let's see, that wouldn't do 4K. I think that's going to be the issue.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the issue there. Yeah, with BDP95, that wouldn't do 4K. So That idea is out the window. Now, I have to say, yes, the most the thing that makes the most financial sense, that costs the least, would be just getting a second Apple TV. That would cost you the least, even though this seems like, shouldn't I be able to just get an HDMI splitter to do this? Unfortunately, it's not as easy as we imagine it should be, because you've got a scenario where you need to be able, if you have just the single Apple TV 4K, and you don't want the annoyance where it goes through a full setup every time you switch from your 4K TV to your 1080p projector, or vice versa. If you want to avoid all that, you really need an HD Fury.
Yeah.
Now, for an Apple TV 4K, you don't need one of the 8K HD Fury devices. You'd be able to get by with one of the 4K HD Fury devices. And the one that would do what you want to do would be the Arcana, the 4K Arcana, because that would be able to leave your Apple TV 4K in 4K output, but it would be able to scale down to 1080p for your projector without the Apple TV 4K thinking it's connecting to a different device every time, because that's what the HD Fury is doing. It's sitting there in between and making the Apple TV think that it's connected to the same device.
I don't know how much it is over there, but it's $300 here.
Yeah, exactly, which is quite a bit more than a second Apple TV. So that's what financially it makes more sense. Now, he's saying, okay, the problem is if I keep the Apple TV, I don't get the very best audio quality possible because I'm having to rely on an optical connection back from my 4K television. Like, that is true. That is the case. Now, you are not doing an Atmos setup, so we're not worried about Atmos. All that's really happening here is I don't know that there's honestly very much 7.1 content on Apple TV that wouldn't, be an Atmos signal. So this is really just, well, you're not getting full Dolby Digital Plus, but you're getting the equivalent of Dolby Digital in 5.1. This is a very small step down, a very, very small step down in terms of what is just possible to get from the streaming services on an Apple TV when it isn't Atmos. Like, it's never going to be Atmos in your setup. So to me, I don't think it makes financial sense to pay so much more for the HD Fury Arcana. But if you're super duper worried about it, then that's the device that'll do what you want to do.
I don't think that some of the things you're worried about make an audible difference anyways. And I certainly don't think that this is going to make a huge audible difference either. So, if it were me, I'd just try not to think about it too much and just go on with my life. Honestly,
to me, the annoyance of having to do a full setup every time you switch displays is way worse.
Way worse. Yeah, that to me would be...
But since you can get a second Apple TV and they're not crazy expensive anymore, I think that's the best solution.
Yeah. Lastly, he says his Epson projector is due for a lamp replacement. He actually worked as a projectionist when he was young, so he's perfectly comfortable handling bare projection bulbs. Replacement lamps for his TW9100 still seem to be available. There are original lamps with housing for about 155 euros, and original lamps without housing for just under 100. And then there are cheaper third-party options for 90 euro with housing or 75 without. There don't seem to be trustworthy reviews, so what would we recommend as the best option? So I published an article this week, I don't even know when it came out. It was just our definitive list, the AV Gadgets definitive list of home theater buying and setup resources. And one of them is the link to that AV Science page that basically... It's AV Science that recommends where to get, different lamp stuff, and that would
probably be Projector Central.
Sorry, and it's on there. But anyways, they have it links to a different resources depending on where you are in the world. So like when I click on it, I get stuff that ships to America. When Rob clicks on it, stuff that ships to Canada. When you click on it, I have no idea. Okay, I have no idea what it's going to do.
I imagine at least the European Union, if not Sweden specifically.
Right. So I would anything that they suggest on there, I would be okay with. Because so far I have had good luck with it. Rob's had good luck with it. Other people who have ordered from have nobody's ever reported anything bad from any of the companies that they recommend, and they all seem to be mostly the same company, but just with different storefronts. So it is you just look for the one that's got the best price that day because they'll have different sales on different sites, but it's all the same company, so you're getting the same product. If you can't do that, if you cannot find a reputable source like this where you can say, okay, these are, these have been vetted in some way, I would just go with the original lamps. The OEMs, and you're not talking a huge difference. So
well, particularly like if you're comfortable doing the bare bulb transfer, and honestly with the Epson ones, it's not that bad. Like if you're someone who's really averse to doing this type of thing, then just get the one with the housing. But he's like, no, I was a projectionist, man. I dealt with way more finicky lamps than these. He's well aware you don't handle it with your bare hand and get your oils onto it. So I'm not really that worried about it. And given that the like third party, I don't know where this came from, is only €25 less than the official one, that I would like 155 to €100 difference. That's a decent chunk of change. That's going to get you a couple movies if nothing else. And if you're comfortable doing the bare lamp, I would spend the €100 and get the official bare lamp.
I would too. Like Rob said, being comfortable handling the bulbs is one thing, and and it's not brain surgery to do these things, but it really comes down to how hard it is to get in and out of that housing. And
and the Epson ones aren't too bad,
as long as they're not too bad, and you don't have to start disassembling things. 'Cause I've done it before too, and I've worked in backstage in theater and stuff like that, so I am I'm comfortable with it as well. But still, that was not as pleasant as I wanted it to be. I'll put it that way. So let's
But you only have to do it the one time until the next replacement. So
get dust everything, get everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get the official bare lamp.
Dan appreciated our discussion about the very expensive Audio Quest speaker wire he saw at a store versus the price monolith speaker wire. He'd like us to dig a bit deeper into the topic because he'd like to better understand how wire gauge and wire length and impedance and speaker load and all of that works. For one thing, we always seem to point straight to 12 gauge speaker wire, but is it really necessary? Isn't 16 gauge okay sometimes up to a certain length? So how do we know what gauge we actually need? What happens if you use the wrong gauge? And what if you use the same speaker wire, same length and everything, but connected to two different speakers? One speaker is like 8 ohm and 92 dB sensitive speaker, but the other is 4 ohm, 86 dB sensitive speaker. Should one of those speakers actually be connected to a different gauge of speaker wire? To answer the first part of your question, 16 gauge is fine.
And in the most home setups, never going to be a problem.
Yes. So, I mean, we're talking, in order for speaker gauge to really make a difference, you have to go either very extreme, like in the size difference. So we're talking like, I've got a 2 gauge wire and a 100 gauge wire or something ridiculous like that for it to really make a difference in a home theater.
Really audibly, noticeably.
So what can happen,
or very, very long,
or and the other side is like literal spools of wire,
right?
Like spools connected to other spools, and then you connect them to your speakers and your receiver in between.
Now, I want to say one very simple thing, which is like, what if you connect the wrong gauge? What would that actually mean? What would you notice, right? In all instances, what you would notice if there's a problem, and sometimes you can measure this in a way that you're really honestly never going to actually hear, but this is where the guides for what the gauge of speaker wire should be for a given length for a certain impedance of speaker, that's where it comes from, is measuring it. But in all instances, what you might notice would be a rolling off of the highest frequencies. In all cases, whether it's because the resistance of the wire has gotten high enough that it starts to affect the signal, or the capacitance of the wire, or the inductance of the wire. The end result is the same thing, which is high frequency roll off. Okay, so in terms of what could a speaker wire do wrong, it's high frequency roll off. And sometimes we can start to measure, way up at 18 kilohertz and higher, you can measure that it's starting to roll off. How audible is that? Not very audible, because we are terrible at hearing frequencies that high, and many of us can't hear frequencies that high at all anymore.
Stop. Yeah. Full stop.
But that is what it would be.
Have you ever been to a concert where your ears were ringing afterwards?
Yeah.
Welcome to the wonderful world of you can't hear 18 kilohertz and higher.
But I mean, there are basically guides that, like I say, are based on, you connect it to an audio precision, and when do you start to measure any amount of high frequency roll off. And we end up with them saying things like, well, if you have 12 gauge copper speaker wire that is 50 feet long, that is fine for any 8 ohm speaker, and maybe a little bit shorter before on an audio precision you might start to measure the tiniest bit of 20 kilohertz roll off. It would be a little bit shorter for a 4 ohm speaker. So there is a difference depending on the impedance of the speaker that you're connecting it to, that second part that you asked about. If you got 2 different impedance speakers, it means that a given gauge of speaker wire will need to be a little bit shorter to ensure that there is 0 measurable high frequency roll off. But then the way you could counteract that is by making the speaker wire a little bit thicker. Because as soon as you make it a little bit thicker, you, like, going from 16 gauge to 14 or 14 to 12 or 12 to 10, you more or less kind of double how long the speaker wire can be for keeping the impedance the same. There's also sometimes some difference between copper wire versus aluminum wire. Aluminum isn't quite as electrically conductive, and the rule of thumb there is that if you kept the wire gauge the same, the length of the aluminum wire should be about 2/3 the length of the copper wire to keep everything the same in terms of what you would measure on an audio precision. So that's kind of all that's going on there. What's really at play with speaker wire is just resistance. What you don't have in a speaker system is impedance matching between the output device and the load device, right? Between the amplifier and the speaker. It's not like a video system where those two things need to match in impedance. We have completely variable impedance on the speaker side of that thing. The impedance of the speaker changes depending on what frequency it's playing. So it's completely variable. We don't need impedance matching. The impedance output of the amplifier is way, way higher than on the speaker side. So we're just looking at pure DC resistance, pure direct current resistance of the speaker wire. And that's really all that's at play in a speaker wire. Because if you try to get into the capacitance and the inductance, if the capacitance goes up, the inductance automatically goes down, and vice versa. Those two things are just inverses of each other. So if you're like, oh, the capacitance of the wire is what I'm worried about, I don't want any high frequency roll off from high capacitance, so I'm going to build a super low capacitance speaker wire. Well, you just built a high inductance speaker wire, which is also going to roll off the high frequencies. So it's better to just kind of leave it alone. You don't really gain any benefit one way or the other.
Whenever you hear like a high-end speaker wire manufacturer, which should be an oxymoron, but it's not, talk about how they've solved the problem of resistance, capacitive, or inductance. Choose one. Whenever they talk about that, they're either just straight up lying, or they have what Rob just said, created another problem by fixing the problem that they had. So, they did all this work to make the low resistance wire, and now the capacitance or the inductance is now stupid. So that's why speaker wire, it is supposed to be neutral. It's not supposed to have
It's not supposed to impart anything to the signal besides conveying it from here to there.
And that's why we are always saying, any effect that a speaker wire or any wire can have on your system is always negative. There is no positive
it's not going to make the signal better.
Yeah,
it can't.
If your speaker wire or digital wire or any kind of other wire, analog wire, is somehow affecting the signal as it's going through, even if you like that change, it is negative. It's negative because it's no longer true to the source. So it sounds
warmer, Tom, because it rolled off the highs.
Right. Oh yeah. Whatever. And this is why we have audiophiles. Well, there's a lot of just straight up lying that goes on audiophiles. Not necessarily malicious lying. They're lying to themselves. They're lying about.
Or just repeating incorrect information.
Yeah, so they hear what they want to hear. So they're like, oh, I changed the speaker wire, now everything's so much better. Well,
if you want the the super technical, I'll have a link to Blue Jeans cable because that goes on and on and on with all the details you could possibly want. But also have links to AV gadgets because Tom has an article about this, and Audioholics where you can get a little bit more technical than what we've talked about here. But yeah, you end up in the same place for pretty much all of them, which is that one of the reasons we just blurred out 12 gauge is because most people don't have setups where they're running more than 50 feet of speaker wire, realistically speaking, but you might be running about 50 feet. Some of your surround back or overhead speakers, it's not that difficult to get upwards of 50 feet. So it's like, if you just buy a huge spool of 12 gauge speaker wire, you're basically never going to run into a situation where it's a problem. That's why it's our easy go-to, because it's sort of it strikes the balance of not crazy expensive, readily available, and almost certain never going to have a problem. But yeah, if you got a bunch of 14 gauge speaker wire, you're also still fine.
Right. And I guess that's what it comes down to. It's sort of shorthand for us just to say, just use 12.
Yeah.
But you could say, oh, my, surround speakers are blah, 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 and they have spring type. I'm like, oh, spring type connectors and 12 gauge wire.
Might want to get thinner. Yeah.
Don't always go together so well. So, you might want to go with 14 gauge or even 16 gauge because, and then you're like, well, if you've got spring type connectors on the back of your speakers, maybe your speakers aren't worried about playing all the way up to 18 kilohertz anyways. So there's a lot going on here. The reality is it's a non-issue. It's an issue created by marketing people in order to sell you more expensive things.
Sure.
You just buy cheap. I mean, we used to say lamp cord all the time because that's what you get. Now, that's what you could get, and it was so cheap, and there was no audible difference. But now they make speaker cable that is dedicated speaker cable that is in-wall rated or whatever
from Monoprice.
It's basically the same price as lamp cord anyway. So you just go ahead and get that. All right. He noticed his current AV receiver that if he goes into the manual speaker setup and he goes to where you can adjust the speaker trim levels for one speaker at a time, the pink noise doesn't automatically come out at reference volume. Mm-hmm. You actually have to adjust the master volume dial yourself before you start the trim level test tones to make sure it's set to reference volume. Why? It means you have to put it up to 0, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Was it always like that? He seems to remember that years ago the test tones just automatically came out at the proper fixed level. I know. It's stupid. It's always bothered me. And Rob and I used to get fights about it because my receiver was like a 3805 or whatever it was, the Denon. It came out at reference volume without you having to change anything, but the new ones don't.
My OnQ at the time also didn't. I was like, you got to turn the master volume up before you start those, man.
Yeah. And I was like, that's dumb. I've been saying that's dumb for like over a decade. So I don't know what to tell you other than that still continues to be dumb.
Yeah,
I understand why they do it, though.
We would certainly say, just have it come out at reference volume. But I think the reason they do it is because there's a contingent of audiophiles out there who say, I don't want your reference volume. I want my reference volume. So let me set the volume dial to where I listen to it and then adjust my trim levels based on that. So I think that's why they did it.
I also think they did it because people don't want to get blown out of their seats at 75 dB or whatever it is. And they want to have the ability to adjust it. So this whole AV receivers are tuned or voiced to sound different from brand to brand versus nope, they all sound the same debate. Guess where we land. Obviously, the marketing product videos talk about each brand's specific tuning and sound, and then most online reviewers talk about the differences in sound between AV receivers. We seem to disagree, and Rob talked about the "but I heard it" phenomenon and admitted he hears differences at first, but then can't reliably identify which receiver is which in the proper blind test. Mm-hmm. He's done non-blind tests where he compared different AV receivers or just different amplifiers, and he concluded that he could hear a difference. But are we saying there really isn't a difference? And his mind was just making it all up? Yeah. To add to the confusion, there's also tuning or voicing when it comes to speakers, and we don't seem to claim that all speakers sound the same, and yet two different speakers can have virtually identical specs, just like two amps or two AV receivers. But we don't seem to have a problem saying that two same spec speakers still sound different, even blind, so what's the deal with all of that? Well, one of those things is not physically creating sound in a room by itself.
Just electrical signals.
Just electrical signals, which can be measured coming in and leaving. Okay. Yep. So you can look at your AV receiver, you can measure the signal that came in, you can measure the signal coming out, and you can see whether or not there has been a difference. And that difference will tell you whether or not it's voice. Now, speaker specs don't tell you nearly as much information as...
No, and they give you, at best, a tolerance range.
Right. So what's your, let's just take any two speakers you want to take. How about Klipsch and Kef?
Well, no, I mean, he's saying two that are spec'd very similarly. So let's take like a Paradigm and a PSB, right?
Okay.
They're going to have really similar specs.
Right, because they're both Canadian manufacturers and they both test in the same lab, and they actually sound fairly similar.
Yeah, but they sound a lot more similar than different.
But you're going to find that depending on how, the design of the front baffle, which is not included in the specs, what type of tweeter that they design, if there's any horn loading associated with it, which is not included in the specs, just the raw spec numbers that you see, the driver arrangement within the cabinet, the porting,
and this is where, like, Audio Science Review, I am in full agreement with them, because they're saying, speaker manufacturers should do a whole bevy of measurements, and I agree with that, and then B, they should publish those measurements. And I agree with that, honestly. That's one area where I'm in full agreement with Audio Science Review. And it's because when it comes to speakers, all the things that you should and could measure goes well beyond just the on-axis frequency response. Yeah. But even if we put all of those other parameters that you could measure and publish aside and just focused on on-axis frequency response, even that, in two similarly spec'd speakers, will have a plus minus 3 decibel tolerance range. So if you at, say, something really easily audible, right in the mid-range, right in where our hearing is the most sensitive, right at 1.5 kilohertz or something like that, had one speaker that is plus 3 versus absolute neutral, and the other speaker is minus 3 versus absolute neutral, that's a 6 decibel spread, potentially, in two speakers that share the same plus minus 3 dB spec. So that's a big tolerance. A 6 decibel spread right in the mid-range would be very audible, even blind. So when we're talking about AV receivers or amplifiers having very similar specs or very similar measurements, right? Like we say, we can measure the electrical signal that came in versus the electrical signal came out. One of those, if it's an amplifier, should have greater amplitude than the other. That's the entire point of an amplifier. But the frequency response should be identical. And it is. Unless it's some really esoteric, pre-pro or AV receiver where they really have tuned it. They genuinely put filters on the frequency response, and it's easy to see. So when it comes to, I tried different amplifiers in a sighted test. I tried different AV receivers. There's a whole other bunch of parameters that you got to make sure are actually the same. Right. Because if the volume level is different, if... I don't know. I don't want to get way down into the rabbit hole of things, but particularly it's the volume matching, because that isn't the same as just putting them both at the same volume dial setting. It's actually making sure the volume coming out is the same. But it's been shown over and over again in actual double-blind listening that like people just can't identify one from the other when the measurements are really that close. So I think it always comes back to what I talk about so frequently on this podcast, which is not attributing what you heard to the actual cause. It's saying, I compared thing A to thing B. I spotted whatever difference. Therefore, it must be that it's brand A versus brand B that made the difference. It's this setting versus this other setting. It's this amount of wattage versus this amount of wattage. Like whatever it is you have in mind that you think you're comparing, we end up attributing whatever difference to that when really whatever difference you heard is very often some other cause. And that happens really frequently. It's what makes scientific comparisons so difficult. It's that rigor of really drilling down to going, but is that? Like, we always have to ask the question, by what mechanism? If I noticed a difference, how did that happen? It didn't happen by magic. And it didn't happen by something that is inexplicable to science. It happened for a reason. We're just humans often very poor at identifying what the reason was. I think that I'll leave it there. Right.
So one last thing I'll say about this whole phenomenon of, but I heard it. People like to say that science can't measure certain things. Like, oh, we hear things differently and our ears are amazing instruments that can't be replicated by a microphone, which is objectively not true.
But there is pseudoscience and there is psychoacoustics, and those two things do come into play and are hard to study.
But if we look at something scientifically and we see that the two things are essentially identical, and then somebody says that they still heard a difference, the idea is not, there's one of two things that could possibly happen. One, how we were measuring before was somehow faulty and didn't show the difference. That's possible. Or the difference is not, it was heard incorrectly, which is also possible. So until one of those things can be proven to be wrong or right in this case, then you can't say that that either one is the more correct one. But the fact is that every time we take out some of the bias, which is what a blind test does. Yeah. Every time we take out some of the bias, the reliability of hearing a difference between two things that we can't measure the difference, it goes to chance. It goes exactly the same as just flipping a coin. It happens over and over and over and over and over again. No one's been able to prove ever. I mean, I'm not talking like, no, ever in any sort of systematic way that they can hear something that we cannot measure. So, this whole idea that, but our ears are so sensitive and that's why, but we just haven't learned how to measure it yet. We have, because you can't do it with your ears. No one can. And that's the big problem.
Sighted people will say that they heard a difference that can't be measured. And that's where the psychoacoustic side of it comes into it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Lastly, he says he's been on the hunt for a new AV receiver. Why are Denon brands charging extra for DRAC? All the other brands that use DRAC just have it included in the original price, so Denon brands are charging extra, especially with the premium prices for their new Marantz models. Seems like a turnoff. And then there are the newly announced Sony ES receiver models. He thinks they look really nice and maybe not as many extraneous features they doesn't actually need and would never use. What do we think? I think DRAC, and we'll see if I end up standing by this statement or not. I think DRAC is one of two things that's going to happen. It's going to immediately fall off in popularity the more people use it. Okay, as people use DRAC, they are going to stop wanting to use it and they're going to go back to Odyssey. Okay, that's what I think. Or the second thing, DRAC is going to end up looking a lot more like Odyssey very, very soon, and that's simply because it is not user friendly. It is enthusiast friendly. Enthusiasts love it, but I see people all over the net just saying DRAC is the best one out there. First of all, I don't think that's true. I don't think it's any better than Odyssey. I think it's more fine-tunable than Odyssey based on how they're doing it right now. I think that's either
with
not
the multi-QX, not so much anymore.
I think that's either not going to last. They're going to change it so it's more user-friendly, or it's just going to fall off in popularity, and that's why Denon's charging extra, because I think Denon knows, or Denon and Marantz and Sound United and whoever else owns them these days, I think they know that once people actually start getting their hands on DRAC, like real people, not enthusiasts, not reviewers, not the trolls on the forums and the message boards who are like, DRAC is the best, and I've never touched it, but I know it's the best because everybody says it's the best. Once people actually get their hands on it, they're going to be like, this sucks. It's so hard to use. I have to buy it. Like they're like, I have to buy it.
It's bad, but
it is though, because you aren't able to just run a program on your AV receiver or with your.
I mean, you kind of can, but in any event, I have a simpler answer, which is I think that's just the licensing deal they signed with DRAC, which they're going to do it on a pay per user thing, so they're just charging extra rather than baking the cost into it all the time, because they do have Odyssey, so they're including that in there, and then for the people who want DRAC, they signed a licensing agreement where you can get it on a per user basis. So I think that's the reason there. I will also just say I don't think those Sony models have fewer extraneous features than other AV receivers, because they got all that center channel nonsense that we talked about in the news there. I think maybe you were just beguiled by the very clean looking optional front panel, which, like Tom said, as soon as you take that off, that thing's going to get lost. So but I have no problem with it. If you really like the Sonys, I think their feature set that they've talked about is pretty much on parity with everybody else, and it's just going to be a matter of if you're okay with their room correction. So Yeah.
All right. We're going to do this last question and then I'm going to go because I got
Okay.
This guy's going to be here any minute now. I need to be ready for it.
Yeah.
Infinite Gary. Back when Gary first built his dedicated home theater room, he went for a scope screen, a CinemaScope screen with aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1. Really should have done 2.4, Gary. I mean, I don't know what you were thinking.
That's exactly his thing.
Oh, is it really? Oh, my God. And he really loved it for most movies. But as the years have gone by, he's noticed that most scope movies that have come out more recently are actually just a tiny bit wider or shorter if you're keeping the width of the image exactly the same. In other words, even on his 2.35 to 1 screen, there are tiny black bars on the top and bottom, and the actual aspect ratio of modern scope movies is 2.39 to 1, not 2.35 to 1. Is there a technical reason why more recent movies are 2.39 to 1, while scope movies from about 10 years ago or more are 2.35 to 1? Because they hate you. They want to make all you people who bought those 2.35 to 1 screens suffer. I'm sure there's a technological reason. I'm sure there is. And I'm sure in the end, the real answer to this question has always been and always will be 16 by 9 screen. Stop complaining.
But you're going to have black bars.
I don't care.
So, I mean, yeah, there were oodles of different ultra wide aspect ratios. I'll try to go back and get the link to, there's a YouTube video that did a fantastic job of going back through the history of oodles of different aspect ratios. And, like once one studio had some kind of ultra-wide format, right? Like it all started with Cinerama, but then, Cinerama cost oodles and oodles and required 3 projectors and 3 cameras and all that type of stuff. So they started coming up with other ways of having ultra-wide aspect ratios. But from studio to studio, they used different methods because they used different film stock and they had different technological advancements going across, and then started using different lenses and all that stuff. So, I mean, it all sort of got shorthanded down to CinemaScope, but that was really just one studio's version of ultra wide was CinemaScope, that precisely. You had all kinds of different ones that were going on. So the idea that things used to be 2.35 to 1 more commonly, that's just a misremembrance or a misunderstanding. It really wasn't the case. But there is a technical change that happened within the last few years, which is the complete shift to digital cameras. And the digital cinema cameras that we're using all use this 4096 by 2190, this closer to 17 by 9 aspect ratio, the digital cinema initiative aspect ratio of 4096 by 2160. So when you take that beginning aspect ratio and then put it through an anamorphic lens, you end up with things coming out at 2.39 to 1 versus some of the 35 millimeter film stock put through an anamorphic lens came out at 2.35 to 1 or 2.40 to 1 or 2.32 to 1 or all kinds of different things that we had. But now that we've had this little bit more standardized digital aspect ratio, where we're just finding that put through the most common anamorphic lenses that we have, you end up with this 2.39 to 1. So on a technical level, that's why that's a little bit more common now.
Because they hate you. In Gary's dedicated theater, he's using his 1080p Runco projector as well as Pioneer Curo Plasma. There are no conflicts with video signals since both are 1080p only. And he uses the 2 HDMI outputs on his Anthem Pre-Pro, so any source can be shown on either or both of them. Lately, he started having some short video dropouts only on the projector, very random, no pattern to the dropouts at all. The audio never seems to drop out, but sometimes the projected image will go completely blank or will turn to static or noise for a moment and then come back. Any idea what could be the cause, and more importantly, what's the fix?
HDMI troubleshooting.
Cable would be my first. The first thing I would try was put a cable on it. Put a different cable on it, which may be already running.
HDMI cable.
Yeah, which might be already running the wall or whatever. But
yeah,
at least, I don't know how you test this for any length of time without buying a very long cable and zip tying it to your ceiling or something like that. But that is definitely the first thing. The first thing I would do.
So I think maybe the very first thing I would do would be, if your projector has 2 HDMI inputs, I would try putting it on the other HDMI input of the projector.
Sure.
Because it seems as though the signal is getting from the source device to your Anthem Pre-Pro, because you're like, the audio never cuts out.
Yes.
So that signal seems to be going. Now, could there be something on either the HDMI input or output of the Anthem? There could. So that would be the other thing that we're going to end up testing. But I would be testing basically the HDMI ports, because absolutely just over time, he's got many years put onto some of these now. So over time, yes, because it's just friction fit, because there are heating and cooling cycles going on, HDMI ports can start to develop problems, as well as the actual, HDMI boards inside, if it isn't even just the port itself. But I would certainly... Like, HDMI troubleshooting is a big headache, but I would certainly try just plugging it into your projector's other HDMI input. That would be step number one. If that fixes it, then chances are it's just that HDMI port number one on your Runco projector has started to age and deteriorate in some way. And then I would try similarly on the Anthem. I would just try plugging the projector output into the output that you're sending to your Pioneer Kuro right now, and see if maybe it's just the HDMI output on the Anthem. And then I guess you've probably got different sources going into different HDMI inputs, but you could try a different input if it seems to happen with one source more than the others. So I would check the ports first, but it also very well could be the cable, just like Tom's first thought. It could just be that HDMI cable that's going up there, again, because it's friction fit, heating and cooling cycles. Yeah, you can those connections, those 19 pairs of teeny tiny little connections can start to degrade over time, and especially just from the friction fit, it can start to lose its grip. So I think that's about all we can do. I don't have a guaranteed fix for this.
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah. So I assume this fellow is here, and you told him to wait just a moment?
He is not, but I thought I heard something. The dog didn't react, so I wanted to go check it out. So who do we have left, Rob?
Okay, we got quite a few, of course, but we've got Greg, which has many pictures that I'm scrolling past here. It's a long update, but actually a very short question. Kieran, Carlos, and Mark. And just to let Joe know, because his question came in early on Monday morning, I got that one too. So all of those will be on the list to start next week.
Right. All right. Well, that's our podcast for today. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Stefan for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 142 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yes, indeed. Stefan, thank you very much for the PayPal donation, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thanks to our 142 patrons over there.
So I want to thank Nelson for sending in his movie code so that we could verify that it was in fact a movie code and not at all use it. And Greg for sending in photos to use on AV Gadgets.
Yes, thank you, Nelson, for the movie code. And Greg, thank you for sending in those photos with permission to use them on avgadgets.com, where Tom is the editor-in-chief.
Lastly, we want to thank those for thanking us for keeping the podcast going, including Stefan, Juls, Kevin, Dan, and Gurinder.
I'll say the names one more time. Stefan, Juls, Kevin, Dan, Gurinder. Thank you all so much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement. We appreciate those, and we appreciate everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
All right. And if you want your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.